So we've set up some environment variables and we even have validation of those environment variables. So the next step is going to be actually connecting now to our PostgreSQL database that's right now sitting on our Docker environment. And how do we do that? Well, we're going to use something called TypeOrm, or Type Object Relation Mapping. So we're going to use that to connect to our Postgres database right here. But what is TypeOrm all about? I'm actually going to jump to NestJS own page, and I'm actually going to go to techniques and database. And here's a good explanation about how you can actually start using and working with TypeOrm. So you can go and check out that guide if you want to. Now, of course, I'm going to jump through some of the simpler things just to get you guys started right here in this video. If you read about this, you'll see that the reason that they're actually using TypeOrm is because they feel it's the most mature object relation mapper in TypeScript right now. And an object relation mapping, if you don't quite know what that is all about, well, it's pretty much just a way for us to write TypeScript code, and then automatically it'll create that code into whatever the database needs in order to create tables, create columns, create different queries to get data, and save data into our system. So that's what the TypeOrm framework is all about. And right now, we're going to try and set that up in our code base. If you want to read more about the actual TypeOrm itself, then you can go and click that link right there. You'll go in here and you can read about the TypeOrm framework and how we'll set up these entities and get a repository and everything. And of course, most of this is already described in the guide. So I'll try and actually go through this guide on vanago.io. First of all, in order to get started, we are of course going to use a library. So we're going to install right here 3 different things. First of all, it'll install NestJS TypeOrm. That's the NestJS specific version of TypeOrm, kind of a wrapper of the basic TypeOrm framework, or library, sorry. The next is the TypeOrm library itself, and then the final one is just being a link to Postgres, so we know that's the one we're going to use. So let's just grab this entire line right here. I'll copy it. I'll go into my code base, I'll put this into my terminal, I'll install it, and there we go. Now we have NestJS TypeOrm and Postgres access in our application. When that is done, we're going to have to kind of set up a way to communicate with this TypeOrm framework. Now, right now, we're not going to be very clean. We're just going to put this into the code where it fits. And then later, we're going to restructure our code to get the clean architecture back into our code setup. And again, if you don't want to use the clean architecture, fair enough. Just put it wherever you want. It's really up to you. I'm just a fan of the clean architecture. So let's try and have a look right here. We need a database module TypeScript file right here. Let's try and go and create that. You'll do a nest, G for generate, and we'll call it module. And then we're going to put it in infrastructure folder. At least let's be a little clean. Infrastructure / and I'm just going to call it database like they do in the guide. And then I'm doing -- flat to kind of avoid creating an extra folder under that infrastructure. The module should now be available under the infrastructure folder. And there we go. We have the module available. That was step 1. Step 2, we need to get all of this information into that module right there. So I'm just going to copy everything right here, and we'll talk about it in the code. Pasting this in right here, and let's just have a look. First of all, we're going to add information for the TypeOrm framework right here, the TypeOrm module. Makes perfect sense. We need to import that. We're going to use the config module pretty much just like we did inside our main.ts right here. We're going to get that config service to the config module. So here we have the config module, and that contains the config service. So now we can inject that. And then right here, we have a factory that can then use that service to go and get all the information that we require right here. So we need to explain it's going to be a Postgres database we're going to work with. We are going to get the host, the port, the username, password, and the database. All of those things, we're getting those, of course, from the environment file right here, using that service that we just used earlier on to get the port as well. The final one with the entities, we'll get back to that one later. It's pretty much just going to reference all the entities we have in our system. This is a dynamic path. I'm not really a fan of that. I'm going to use something different down here. I'm just going to put in the entities we need as we move forward. So I'm just getting rid of that. And the final thing is actually the synchronized true, means that every time I restart my system, it'll also destroy and recreate the data in the database. So of course, this should be false for production, but right now let's just keep it as true since we are just developing right now. So now that is done, let's try and go back. With that class available, we can actually start using the class inside our app module to kind of access that database right here. So let's try and go into the app module and kind of open up for that database module. And notice it's already there because I used the command down here. It already added it to my app module right there. Sweet. So that is done. The next thing I want to do is create my first entity. And we're just going to create a simple entity for client. So let's just try and go back to the code. I'll just keep this under the infrastructure as well. Again, right now, just let it be kind of a mess. We'll fix the code structure later on. We'll make a client.entity.ts right here. That's going to be my client for the database. I'll add the client and I'll just paste in the code from his client in the example. But I'm going to do a few things a little different. First of all, I'll do an export right here instead of having the export down here. That's just the way I do it. I like to do it like this. I'll add a client right here. So instead of post, it should be called the client entity, right? And I'll use the rest of it pretty much. The primary generated ID will just be a number for now. We'll change that later because I actually want this to be a string. We'll also have a column for the nickname. So let's just add that right here, the nickname. There we go. And again, notice this is just very basic stuff right now. It's just going to generate a table that has a single column with auto-generated IDs that are normally just counted up one by one. And it'll generate a column that's just a string with no restrictions or anything like that. So that's how simple it actually is to set up the actual client. The final thing I need to do to kind of start using this client is to go into the database module. And right here we have entities. I'm going to add that client in there and just import it like this. There we go. Now we have the client available and we actually can start using it. Let's see if that's enough for us to actually start doing something in our system. So let's try and jump into DataGrid and see if that has changed anything. It seems there's a new schema here now after I actually made that change, but there's still no public databases. Let's just try and refresh this and just restart everything and see if that helps. I restart only the backend, not the actual Docker, of course. Let's try and refresh and see if that helped. There we go. Now the first table actually popped up because I added that client. And you can now see I have a nickname and I have an ID. Then the ID is auto-incremented and unique. Right here you can see that. And the nickname is just a varchar, which is just a string, right? So that was all I had to do. Now I actually have access to my database using the config service and setting up TypeOrm. And I actually already created my first table and my first column in that table by actually creating a client entity and setting up the column information that I would like. So that's it for this lesson. Now you guys know how we can actually create using TypeOrm, actually start creating data inside our data source, which now in our case is actually our Postgres database. So next lesson, let's have a look at repositories. See you next time. Bye.